In this video, I'm going to tell you the invaluable process on how we got millions of dollars of bike parks paid for and built all throughout Missouri within a 3-year time span. This isn't a story of money being donated by a private person or some massive company either. This is how people like you and I can convince an average city to build a $1 million bike park. To share this process, I'm going to be talking with Dave Coolio of Gork Gravity, who has spearheaded this process for every single one of these bike parks. He's spoken at an ungodly amount of city meetings across the state and has shown council members and government officials time and time again why building a mountain bike park is the best thing that they can do for their city. Something that normally takes 5 to 10 years to get approved, he is somehow doing within 6 months. And today, he and I will be sharing exactly how you can replicate what he does to show your town that they need a bike park. We've got it boiled down to 7 steps that I truly believe anyone can take and apply to their city or town. And I highly advise that you listen to all of them because each step is extremely crucial for the success of getting a mountain bike park built and paid for in your town. If you've got questions about all this after listening to the whole thing, please comment below and I will respond to the most liked questions. And if you find all of this information really useful, please share the video. You know, the more people that end up getting this information, the more bike parks we'll get around the US and maybe the world. So, without further ado, let's get into step 1. So, step 1, we talked about this already yesterday, but you need a person with a vision. Can you go into that?
Yeah. Basically, I mean, if you're into cycling in general and you're into this sort of thing, you've probably had some sort of idea at one time or another. So a person with a vision, with an idea, a person that will love and care for this space and is motivated to make this a reality for their community. Typically, it's a local resident. Sometimes it's a government person, but usually it's better if this is going to be somebody that's like a volunteer.
Is there anything else to add as far as what this person needs to, maybe characteristics of this person?
So the person should be personable, be a salesperson would help, and also have an understanding of government structure and background so that they can work within the systems and understand how governments function. And then you can translate the biking elements over to the government side. And making that leap is probably the most difficult thing for the majority of people that have the idea. They can't close that gap.
So I imagine somebody who didn't know anything could have a team who does know something.
Correct.
Just they're a highly motivated person with the right people backing them.
In a sense, the only reason why I've had success is because of my ability to find experts to solve these problems and fill these needs. So everybody brings something to the table, and you must surround yourself with people who have these talents or experience.
Is that something that they need to have done before they even start pursuing this whole process? Is that something that they should kind of have a little bit of like people in their back pocket? Or is it, you know, get into it and you'll meet those people along the way?
So you can start development of this vision and this process. You can begin these government conversations lightly and at the same time build your team up. Because it's hard to recruit people if you don't have something on paper to show them.
So you need to be sort of a leader type, you would say.
Sure.
That can sell ideas and bring people together. You're going to have to do a lot of talking.
Yes.
So if you're afraid of talking, you might want to find somebody else who can fill that role. Okay, so after you've got your salesperson and your clear vision laid out, then that moves us on to number 2, which would be finding a viable location, right?
Yep, that's correct. So typically you'll go to a park, an existing park or a parks department, and then you're looking at anywhere from a 3 to 5 year conversation, 7-year conversation, planning, all of that, because that is the nature of their process for anything that needs to go on, generally speaking. You have to go through things like the initial person, trail committee, all these other layers. And then the other element of it is that I have a handful of rules that guide me, and one of them is I don't take trail away. And what I mean by that is if there's an existing trail system or there's a trail specifically that has a purpose of, say, multi-use, hiking, walking, running, riding, sometimes horses, we don't go in and change that. We don't take that away and we make that then the thing that we want, say a flow trail or a jump line or whatever else, and we restrict the other people's access to it just by the nature of the design of the trail.
Yeah.
Don't ever do that. Add new things, add complementary pieces. That's a key element, complementary. So add a line off of it, go to a new location entirely, or do what I do, which is you go look for government surplus property.
Okay. What is that?
Government surplus property is property that's owned by the government that usually like a local city or an entity that doesn't serve another purpose, right? So it could be land that's to be developed one day. Maybe it's environmentally challenged land, which is something I look for. Like there's an erosion problem, there's stuff like that going on, and we can go in and stabilize that thing. Okay. There's options for like tax land sales, so defaulted tax sale property, and it's different per area, per region. It's based on federal law, but when you get down all the way to the city level, it can be very different from place to place, even just down the road. So you kind of have to figure out how your community functions, and then you can ask for, is there a list of these properties? And then you can go look, and some of them could be a strategic place. And then you've removed the barrier of the Parks Department typically. You can go and petition to have that land turned into this park and then hand it over to the Parks Department afterwards. Gotcha. And that's the key element for land selection.
So now we're starting to get into, you found that land and into step 3, which would be you're kind of presenting this stuff to your government. You're starting to speak to these government officials.
Yep. This gets into, like I said, number 3, government official, right? How do you approach your government? Well, typically, volunteer organizations go to parks departments. And again, there's a process in there. And again, that's usually 3 to up to 7 years, right, on average. My recommendation, how we go from years to 3 to 6 months, is by approaching government officials that are in the leadership roles. So typically a government structure for a community consists of aldermen, consists of a council, one or the other is usually the name of it, and then they have either a mayor or an executive appointed, right? So that is typical structure. Those people are there because they want to better their community. That is generally the reason they're in those positions, right? They also, like you, want to see their community prosper. So you have to find someone on that board that can become your friend. You can talk to them offline, not publicly, but offline, and say, hey, look, this is my idea. This is where we're at. What I suggest looking for is somebody that is interested in something old school. Like we always find somebody that thinks they want a skate park. And don't get me wrong, I still love skate parks.
Yeah.
But the point is that there's all these elements that have kind of been in their back of their mind. They want to do something for the community, but they don't know what it looks like. This is the modern version of that thing, right? The combination of trails, flow parks, all these different things, right? That amalgamation of this. But basically you have to find that person and then help them see that this is that legacy project. This is that thing that will set their name in stone that they did something great for the community. And then that person will work through all the other aldermen. Then with their blessing, you go in front and just do public speaking.
Would you like to go into any of the lines, the good lines that can really turn a council like that over quickly?
Okay. One is that you want to help them to spend their money on their community. That's what you're there for. You're not there to ask for money. You're there to show them how to best spend their tax dollars on their own community.
Got it. So again, it's you're not asking for land. You're not asking for anything. You're just there to show and tell.
Correct. A real common concern immediately is liability. Okay. What is it best compared to? What is it the easiest comparison to calm that concern? Because realistically, from an insurance standpoint, typically in most places, it's not too different than just any other trails. But they can't perceive that, and so you must relate to something they can see. Swimming pools, right? So if you take a swimming pool, for example, swimming pool is the highest liability item, the most expensive in maintenance, the most expensive in the initial installment, and it's the only place where, God forbid, children could drown. And everybody's got them. Extremely high risk, and everybody has them. There is little to no liability when comparison to a swimming pool.
So to insure something like a bike park is a fraction compared to a swimming pool.
Typically, yes. And it depends on the design. There's other elements in there, but yes, the answer is it's almost always less than their local swimming pool.
One other thing I have here is have data and articles, and studies, and things like that handy right behind those facts, like we kind of just touched on.
What would be really important is to go in there packed with knowledge. So both reaching out to people that have had this experience, as well as there's an endless assortment of articles. So if you Google common terms such as bike park economics or bicycling economics, it brings up all kinds of things from articles to official studies to less than official studies to anecdotal evidence, right? And you can also search for things like Bike Park Saves Small Town America or Revives Town. And even if your city is already a successful, big, growing entity, right, that has 80 or 100,000 people and a $192 million budget, or you're in a small town that has a $400,000 budget, right? You're just all over the map. All of this stuff will still apply. You just have to pick out those elements that work best for you. And don't give crazy numbers, right? So like Bentonville, they have a study from 2017 that most people discover. It's really great. It's a huge amount of numbers. Off the top of my head, it's 27 million invested and you get a 17 million return. It's all these huge numbers. You need to do it by percentage. So if you invest this much money, expect this level of return on investment. And so one of those easy numbers is look at what $100 does.
Let's take a look at what $100 will do for your town. Say each person who comes and rides at your new park ends up spending, on average, $100. Whether that's on dinner, snacks, gas, or just general shopping, this does seem to be what people end up spending. Now, say there are 5 riders every day of the weekend. Not a big number, probably pretty accurate. So, 15 in total over the entirety of the weekend. Now, there are 53 weekends in a year, so that total amount in that year comes to around 795 people. But let's round that up to 800 so it looks a little nicer. Add the addition of an event or two held at the park that brought in, say, 700 people, and you're at 1,500 people visiting to ride that year. Now, times that by the amount spent on average every time someone comes and rides, and you're looking at $150,000 spent every year within your town. And you could probably double those numbers pretty easily and say 300,000. That's a lot of money.
Right? And those kind of numbers are what prompt the attention of city leaders. If you can show them those numbers with cycling, their return on investment through indirect revenue return, you're going to win them over. That's the biggest one, is probably indirect revenue.
Gotcha. So let me ask you this, because I think this is probably, right along there with liability. The first question that comes to mind with all these things is money. Like, where am I getting the money from?
So here's what's really important. Typically, not in every case, but most cases, the city will tell you officially they have no money. They all think that way. They all operate that way. There's some cities that quite literally don't have money. They're very small towns, right?
Sure.
But typically they have a functioning budget. What they're actually saying to you is, you are not as important as everything else we already allocated. We've already selected where our money is going every year. We budget our money. You must show them that your item is not only important enough to be in that budget, but it's so important that they should skip other things and put yours in first. And that is the biggest part of the sales pitch. And if you can get them to do that, then that means you justified that it will have a return on investment, that it will show that you can bring in tourism or quality of life improvements or be an asset to your community in general. That is the biggest piece of it. And if you've sold that, you can skip way ahead of this waiting process. I highly suggest not going for grants. The reason is that you never know if you're going to get the grant. Grants take about a year to process on average. Some are shorter, many are longer, but about a year. And then you don't know if it's going to be funded, and everyone's going to lose attention by then if you don't already have a project. Grants are really great once you get the initial funding done and you have the initial phase of the project built. During that time of the building, start applying for grants. Apply for every grant you can. But grants are second if you want to park tomorrow. If you're wanting to do things quickly, right, in the sense of a 3 to 6 month time frame, comparatively to multi-year, 3 to 7 year time frame, you need to study your government structure and understand how they're funded. And if your system, your governmental system there is large enough and has a tourism tax, that's one avenue. As an example, in one location, they did not have a tourism tax, but they had a fund that was in place for community development based on a flood that happened. It was to promote tourism and do all kinds of other elements. And you must find those kind of programs and apply. And that's where your funding comes from, right? To figure out how your community leadership can gain access to that thing for the purposes of this park. You have to justify that use.
Gotcha.
And tourism money typically cannot be used for things like potholes. So you can show that this is that tourism draw, right? Even if it also overlaps and is a quality of life improvement for your community, its focus would be tourism. So builder selection is number 4 on our list, but it doesn't necessarily always fall in number 4. because there's different types of contracts. There's design build contracts. There's all these different structures from a governmental standpoint to get a builder in there, right? Do you want them to design it remotely and submit that, or do you want them to come build it as they see fit on site? Those are the basics of those two structures.
So as we move on to step 4, sort of step 5, whatever that is, you're going to start to reach out to trail building companies, not necessarily to build the park, but to design the stuff, so that you have like a real clear image on exactly what's going to be getting done in that location that you guys got approved.
When you get to step 5, which is the contract and putting stuff out, right? You're going to get all these applicants from these builders. You're going to get from people that claim to be builders, from people that want to build for the first time. You're building for the community, right? This is you're doing something for your community. You want to ensure that these people you're working with have done this multiple times before. Do not hire a construction company that has never built the type of trail you're proposing.
And what you're saying here too, to further elaborate, is not necessarily that they've just built trail before. It's that whatever you specifically want, whether it's a downhill park or a pump track, that specific style. If you want a certain thing, make sure they've done that specific style before, because all trail building companies are not equal, on each style. They all kind of specify or whatever the word is. They're good at one thing.
They
specialize in one thing. They're good at whatever it is: pump tracks, downhill, cross country, flow trail. You got to do your research here. Don't just take it all as one.
And to elaborate a little bit more on that builder selection, design typically costs money. And so this is an issue that, depending on your level of funding and depending on your funding source, this can be too much money spent. So there's a balance from design to cost. So in order to save money, I will actually do the design process for a lot of communities, because that will afford them, another trail or 3 trails for the same price as it would cost to design it. But in some cases, you need a design company to do it at a more advanced level because the scope and size of the project. So as an example, we had a $3.5 million project that required an architectural firm to develop the entire park. And then the builders worked within that firm.
Okay, wow.
And so that was a bigger project. Whereas if you want to do a smaller project, we'll go in and lay it out. And then the builders, knowing that there's not a lot of revenue or, a lot of money to work with in a given project, the builders themselves sometimes will show kindness, and they'll actually come do a site walk with you and make sure that this is a reasonable location and it will work. And they'll help you to put things down on paper that will then allow you to move on to step 5. The next element about this stage, you're going to shift from being the person describing things to them to essentially being a part of their team, because they're going to need your eyes and ears on the ground during this project to know that what they paid for, they're getting. Okay. You need validation from a cycling standpoint. Does this trail look right? Does the layout look right? Is it going to work correctly?
Gotcha.
If they're not riders themselves, it will be very difficult for them to judge, and they're going to need that help. And then that leads into they're going to need a contract, right? And so over elaborate contracts will dissuade typical builders from applying, right? Especially if you have an over elaborate contract. As an example, I had to deal with one that was 30 pages. And the price of the project was like $50,000 to $80,000.
Oh,
those two things don't go together. You will not attract builders. And so you have to help community leadership understand that. Now, if you have a, 2, 3, 5, 6, even 10-page contract, that's much more, attractive to your typical builder, right? And so it's important that that distinction is made. Look at other existing contracts that have been filled. Find them. They're publicly available. You can search them out. The other element is that you should study and understand government contracts. You should understand how these things work within their community and how your community uses the contracts, what they're used to seeing, right? So a couple examples are request for bid, request for proposal, request for information, right? RFI, RFQ, RFP, there's all these acronyms, right? Understand them and what their purpose is. Design proposals, there's so many different variations, but basically, if I were to simplify it all, you can have one where you request them to design it based on the landscape and provide that design, and then you vote on the design. Or two, you have them apply based on their qualifications. So regardless of the project, they're applying based on what they've already accomplished and showing their resume, and then they're selected that way. And then once they're selected, they'll actually go in and design and build everything.
Gotcha.
So those are the two main processes that you can hire a builder. 6 is breaking ground, right? So breaking ground means that the contract has been finalized. You've helped select the builder, right? The builder's in place, the contract's in place, the project's beginning, right? And sometimes there's a complementary volunteer element going on at the same time. But basically you have groundbreaking. Typically you do a photo, it's a big deal, it's the whole thing. It's kind of cool, actually. It means the city's moving forward. Now, at this point, you have to ensure that the project goes forward correctly. That's going to be on you. That's your eyes as this steward, as this person with the vision. While that's happening, you need to simultaneously be planning this grand opening, right? You need to work with the builders and anticipate things like weather changes, delays, environmental issues, somebody knocking down all the trees, which you might have experienced. There could be all kinds of delays in there. And so you must anticipate those delays and plan a grand opening to, again, show the city that this thing has happened and here's all the excitement around it. And here's the elements that people miss. You got to follow on with the report. So if you had them fund this project, you owe them a report on its success.
Gotcha. To show that it's giving a return.
Yes. Not just a thank you, but you must show the numbers. You must show that people showed up, they spent in town, where they came from, what state they came from. All that kind of data is great. The more elaborate it is, the better it is for them. Show all kinds of statistical data and excitement. Maybe get some quotes from people. Maybe interview a couple people real short, but have people write in letters, even just short stuff, or at least go up and shake the hands of the alderman. Because at the end of the day, this is the city's project that you helped them do, and they need to know that it was successful so they can speak on it. And then in another 6 months or so, or after the first writing season is closed, again, follow up with a report on the success of the project, right?
So you're doing
real short term, like that initial bump, and then you're doing long term.
Yes.
To really just relay to them, this was worth all the money that you put into it. Tenfold.
That leads us on to number 8, maintenance, care, and follow-on phases. Well, this should be talked about throughout the entirety of this design, through the entirety of this process, right? Maintenance is the biggest thing, the longevity of the trail system, the insurance of the trail system, the insurance against the investment, right? They want to know that this thing is going to stay there. And the type of maintenance and the care that it's going to need will be predicated on the location and the soil conditions that you have and the type of trail that you built. Okay, a lot of it will be on the builder, but you must understand what it is so that you can promote what type of maintenance it needs. As an example, if you're going to do something that is highly manicured, like a very elaborate flow trail, it's a good idea to have the community leadership set aside an annual amount from the original project, say $5,000, $10,000, and have the builders come back after every winter season and reface the jumps and redo any water management and any other things that happen that could be needed. And that could include machine work or whatever needs to be done. Separately from that, you can work on the volunteer aspect of it and have a volunteer crew, make sure that they have experience, or you have somebody in there leading them with experience, and you work with the builders to understand what should or shouldn't be done and develop a program for that. Understand that they're going to be worried, the government officials are going to be worried about care and maintenance, and they're going to think that it's going to be on them and they're not going to be able to keep up. Well, if you look at most parks, at least in our region, almost all of the trail systems are not kept up by parks departments because they don't have the capacities. No matter what we have parks that work in multi-million-dollar budgets, they still can't maintain their own trail systems because it's too much from a mileage standpoint.
You do it by foot.
Yes, so you have to have a volunteer program in place.
So this is probably something you want to establish pretty early on.
Correct.
That's just another point to sell to the city, like we've got maintenance handled, or you just hire these guys.
Yeah, I highly suggest the possibility of having builders return especially with these more elaborate bike park focused elements.
So you might even start by trying to get approval for getting the guys back, and if that's not an option, then
It should be in the original layout, in the original plan.
Gotcha.
Just plan for that,
Yeah.
and then it becomes normal. Good. Number 8, I also have the overlap from maintenance care to follow-on phases, right? And so this falls back into the planning. You always anticipate throughout the whole plan that you will not be able to fund all of the vision, or that you will fund just the initial vision and you're going to want phases. Partly that keeps people returning or wanting to return to your trail system, right? But make it part of the plan. So the city is already anticipating that there's more to do.
Gotcha.
Help them to understand this isn't, we build this and then it's done.
Yeah.
We build this and then we get this level of return. And when we add this next phase, we get this greater return. So that is the key elements, the plan on the additional phases and so forth.
So what I've got here, and I know this is definitely still a big part of it, tell the story before other people do.
So tell the story, show the data, basically getting out in front of it on your local social media channels. If your city has a page where everybody hangs out, help them to understand that the money being utilized, hopefully, the money being utilized is coming from a source that can't be used for any other purpose.
Gotcha.
So it's really common. I already said this, but it's a really common thing. You'll get a complainer that comes on and says, why aren't you fixing the potholes?
Yeah.
That is a very normal thing. Well, they don't understand that the money for the potholes is from a different source. Legally, it cannot be the tourism source. But you can answer them by saying this tourism draw will then bring in indirect revenue that can then be used to fill the potholes.
Awesome. So this is where I'm going to end this conversation. There is an endless amount of examples and things you can say to your government to help sell them on getting this bike park. But the video would be like 2 or 3 hours long. If you want that length of a video though, let me know in the comments and we'll see about doing that. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this conversation and found the information provided by Dave and I to be extremely useful on your endeavors to get a mountain bike park in your town. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.